Hello, my name is Kodir Kuliev. I'm an international anti-corruption and compliance and governance expert. I work both in public and private sectors, but since we are presenting these interview under the auspice of Webster, I'm affiliated with Webster Global as well, particularly at the home campus in Tashkent. I am delivering various courses in business, IR, and ethics at Webster Tashkent. All right, so let's start with what is corruption. Yes, corruption has existed since the human history. Yes, it's since the Roman Empire collapse, let's say third century. Catholic Church indulgence has been sold, let's say, what, 16th centuries. Qing dynasty in China, close to 19th centuries. And we can recall a lot of scandals in the West, ranging from Watergate scandal, Lockheed scandal, and many, many. Yes, so corruption has been there, millennia unfold. And corruption varies the definition of it from country to country. So, in other words, it's contextual. And no, there is no universal definition of corruption. Why? Because the cultural, economic, social, and political dynamics are different in different countries. However, there is a core definition of it that if you compare a lot of different definitions of corruption that revolves around this core elements of it. That's abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Even United Nations Convention Against Corruption does not actually come to consensus. The experts that designed UNCAC. Why? Because mainly because of the different cultural and legal dynamics of each country. However, UNCAC perfectly gives many variety of let's say types of the corruption and elements of offense, for example. Yes, but corruption, the word etymologically is coming from the Latin word corrumpere, which means spoiled and destroyed. So metaphorically, you can just basically imagine an apple staying there for quite a long time and rotting it. So that's how we can reflect that into the system, that clean versus destroyed system. And corruption have to be perceived as generally as a moral issue as well as the legal issue. So there's always a line in between depending on which country you are in. Corruption have to be perceived, let's say, generally from the perspective of game theory in economics. Yes, if the sanctions are severe, if the punishments are lenient, and there's a lot of opportunity for individuals to corrupt, and they know there will be no punishments to commit the unethical acts, then the probability of the corrupt act goes up. In other words, let's call it corruption as a crime of calculation. So, as well, it must be seen as a crime of passion, yes, which is an individual moral issue, which is very much hard to battle against it. Why? Basically, it's very time consuming. But within the system, if you look at this as a systemic issue, as an mathematical economic issue, we can say when there's a lot of opportunities, when there's a lot of pressure, then people start rationalizing their dishonest behaviors. Yes, even in private sector compliance, there is something called fraud triangle, in three dimensional. So there is pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. If you decrease an opportunity for corrupt acts by introducing policies and compliance mechanisms in the institution, if you try to close up those conditions that makes the system conducive to corruption, like wage, treating your employees fairly, yes, human rights due diligence in the organizations, and if you're careful with the pressure, like there could be financial pressure, I mean, you name it. So um, wherever you go to Sydney, you go to New York, you go to Tashkent, or any other contexts, wherever you see there's excessive monopoly or market power, wherever you see a lot of discretion to decide, let's say you get the service or you don't get the service, and no transparency, and hence no accountability, you will always find corruption in that country. No, not really, because corruption is a two-way exchange. Yes. Let's say you are the public sector and I'm a private sector player. Yes. If I don't um, offer you a bribe, let's say, bribe is one of the most endemic forms of the corruption. There are many forms of corruption. You as a player of the agent of the public sector, you won't be able to actually, there won't be any corrupt act, let's say bribery. Yes, of course you can, if we say, if you can counter argue saying, okay, the private sector uh, is not willing to give a bribe, but then public sector can extort the bribe, so extortion is also another form of corruption. However, statistics tell us that worldwide the major endemic forms of corruption is bribery. So that said, private sector and public sector have to be equally um, kept under the radar to battle the corruption. And that's why United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, for example, has always been proclaiming about holistic approach to fight corruption. So I fully disagree with the fact that many people say it's just have to be seen in the public sector. Yes, so it's a two-way exchange. I strongly believe that young generation, let's put it this way, at the age of, let's say, roughly 20 to 40, can turn integrity into daily life by refusing unofficial payments, by promoting transparency, and there's a lot of programs and tactiques for that, um, by speaking up carefully about corruption. But if you ask me if there is anything, any other strategies that I can propose for young people, let's say in here in Uzbekistan, there are many strategies and tactics. For example, let's divide the suggestion into two approaches. Yes, let's call it negative, don't do those things, or positive, do those things. Yes, if we speak about negative approach, that risky approach, I would suggest um, youth to never point a finger at a corrupt person, to never criticize, to never investigate, to never go after the scenarios where civil society, even not only young people, spot abuse of power, unless you can prove that in the court. So you got to be very careful to write and speak about those things. Why? To stay safe. Yes, that's why that's my number one suggestion. Because in Uzbekistan, fortunately, we exercise what we call presumption of innocence. So if you're talking about the positive sides, like do those things is the most safest strategy that I would recommend young people in Uzbekistan to do something about corruption is, let's say, mm, benchmarking. Let's call it integrity benchmarking. Yes. Um, how how is it done? You can go to public sectors or private sectors and start comparing and analyzing, let's say, not the corruption, but those elements that makes the system conducive to corruption. For example, transparency or public service delivery. Yes, if you go to one clinic, yes, or school or whatever the public sector is, you see how fast the service has been delivered. Yes, waiting minutes. Yes, how transparency the decisions are made. Um, what is the closure of the grievance mechanism in these countries, and then you compare. I think this is the safest way, safest, secure, and serviceable method to carefully, actually, for the young people to face counter unethical acts in both public and private sector. And then what you do is you collect the data. Yes, you don't investigate, you don't blame anyone, you just collect publicly available, so exclusively publicly available data, and then you pass that along to someone, let's say youth associations or someone else. I think that's what we call collective action. That's what I suggest. If that message have to be directed to young people, then yes, there are many messages I would like to convey, but the most important ones is you guys have a lot of opportunities. Yes, we're living in the age of, let's say, digitalization. Yes, the age of intense globalization. Yes, I think take advantage of that, but also focus on what I call trust. Trust is something that sustainably guarantees you career growth, sustainably guarantees you success as a person. Yes, and this is something a bit of concerning worldwide, not only in Central Asia, not only in CIS countries, but worldwide. So trust can be secured through always you, as I said, um, promoting transparency, always refusing unofficial payments, trying to collectively cooperate with those who have zero tolerance against corruption, against unethical acts, against any breaches. I think this is the way when people start trusting you, because there's always a small number of people who are watching. You're always under the radar. Yes, and yes, many people want you to fail, realistically, but there's very few people are watching for your behaviors. So I think even within the context of the school, always behave in an ethical way. I think trust is the most precious element that young people have to focus on.